3, 2, 1. That was backwards. Welcome back, fam. Oh goodness, it's New Year's Day. This video is gonna be a hot mess. Frankly, I'm a little hungover. Hey kids, if you're watching, maybe don't. Just in case YouTube gets confused. So it's New Year's Day. Definitely kind of hungover. I didn't even do that much last night. I literally just laid on my couch with some friends, drank wine, and watched Disney for like 10 hours. But it was a lot. It was a lot, okay? And yeah, but I was gonna try and make Wine and Dine like a monthly thing, but it turns out liquor's expensive. Duh. So I figured while I have it here, I should take advantage of it because I'm overdue to put a video out. I try to do weekly and it's been longer than that, and I'm really tired and sleep deprived. So I thought that this would be a great time to sit down and have a serious conversation about dog nutrition and finish off the wine. Plus it's festive. So I just have a couple more broad topics that I would like to discuss, hate on, provide criticism of with zero actual alternative, kind of like Greta Thunberg, but for dog food. This is wrong, but it's not my responsibility to fix it because I'm not a big giant corporation. So today we will be finishing off this beautiful bottle of white. It's called Fetzer, and it was on the $12 rack at my local superstore, grocery store if you're not Canadian. So today I would like to talk about special needs dogs. Looking at you, doodle parents. No, I'm not. In all honesty, I don't hate doodle parents. I hate irresponsible doodle breeders. Whole other tangent. And doesn't have to do with food, so we're not gonna go there today. Your dog has some severe allergies. First of all, I would quickly like to say that actual food allergies only really account for about 10% of allergies in dogs. I'm gonna have to dig around to find that stat, but I did read it somewhere very recently and I was like, oh, that's interesting. My YouTube friends will love this. So you have this dog, it's got some allergies, and you go to the vet and they give you a couple different options. You get to try an elimination diet and see if removing specific ingredients, usually the primary protein, reduces their allergies. You can put them on a vegetarian diet, or you can put them on a prescription diet or one that contains hydrolyzed protein. So those last couple of options are not swell. So let's start with the vegetarian diet, because I feel like if I start with the least controversial one, maybe people will stick around. I don't know. Like I said, wine's expensive and I don't do this often. So if you like this content or you want to see me get drunk and rage some more, be sure to like, subscribe so someday I can get monetized. So vegan, vegetarian, whatever you want to call it, diets don't work. Are not healthy for dogs, to be completely frank with you. Dogs are technically omnivorous to a degree, so they can survive on a vegetarian diet, whereas a cat cannot. Cat is obligate carnivore. Nutrition has to come from meat. They can, I said this to my mom the other day and she was like, well, we used to feed our cats, they used to steal French fries from McDonald's all the time, and our one cat, Vula, really liked cheese and she always ate it. And I was like, yeah, she ate it, but she's not getting any nutritional benefit from it. I could go eat cardboard and it would probably pass right through, hopefully, but I'm not getting any nutritional value from it. All of cats' nutrition has to come from meat. Non-negotiable. That is where it comes from. But with dogs, they can get some nutrition to a degree from fruits, veggies, grains, etc. The issue with vegetarian diets truthfully comes down to the protein. It's extremely hard to keep a dog healthy on a vegetarian diet because most of the prepackaged, most of the kibble versions, the primary protein source is legumes or chickpeas. And if you're making it at home, you have even more of an issue because it's way difficult to meet the digestive needs of a dog exclusively vegetarian from home. You have to have very extensive nutrition training, and I don't mean from the internet. Plus, we haven't actually done any long-term studies into the effects of a vegetarian diet on a dog. So we actually don't know what a dog requires specifically from fruits and veggies that it's not getting from meat. It's a very risky thing. Please don't do it. Just don't. It's not that complicated. Good, moving on. So the problem with vegetarian diets lies primarily in the lack of protein or the lack of usable metabolizable protein, which means the amount of protein that they can actually metabolize and use in the body, the remainder of which is essentially filler. The only time I've seen a vegetarian diet work for a dog was he was born with congenital liver disease and actually needed to go to a veterinary college for an experimental surgery. And in the meantime, he had to be on the lowest possible protein food because his liver was just not working and his kidneys were a mess. It was life and death for up until the surgery, actually. So for him, having a vegetarian diet worked super well because it kept him going long enough to get to the surgery to fix whatever was going on with his liver. And then by the time his liver recovered and healed from the surgery, he was able to start implementing new proteins and is now doing really well on another food that is meat-based. I believe he's on a chicken and salmon formula now. I'd have to double check, and he's not my dog, so I'm not gonna do that. He was getting pretty much what I consider actually to be like the top of the line as far as vegetarian kibble goes, which is the Gather formula from Petcurian. So he was on that. He was also on the vegetarian natural balance kibble, and he was getting the natural balance wet food as well. When you look at dogs who have allergies, immediately I get so frustrated with vets who immediately jump to a vegetarian diet as an elimination diet because it can take anywhere from 3 to 8 months for an allergy to resolve if it is related to diet. And that's only if they haven't been like picking at their skin or otherwise exacerbating it and getting kind of caught in that itch scratch cycle. But then when you put a dog on a vegetarian diet for that long, they are going to become protein deficient because the reality is they can survive on a vegetarian diet, but they're not going to thrive, and it is going to cause them nutritional deficiencies long term. If you wanted to feed a vegetarian diet for ethical reasons, truthfully, I would get you to reconsider why you have a carnivorous animal as a pet, if that is your motive there. Especially if you're a cat owner. I've seen people on Instagram who have exotics like fennec foxes and lions who feed them vegetarian diets, and it's just not okay. You can't take an animal that is not even domesticated and then also a carnivore, completely change their environment, completely change their diet, and then expect that to go well. But in the long term, you are at the very least doing serious risk to their health over ethical concerns. So if you are a diehard vegetarian, and I was raised vegetarian, I have nothing against vegetarians whatsoever. I eat fish now, but that's it. Anyway, and even that I'm cutting back on. So if you are a vegetarian who, for ethical reasons, is considering putting your animal on a vegetarian or vegan diet, please don't. They're not meant to eat what we eat. This whole urban myth of we fed our dogs table scraps and they were fine for 12 years. I know dogs who were fed Old Roy, like Walmart's brand, for 10 years and were also fine. It doesn't show up overnight. The symptoms of deficiencies and chronic malnutrition are not simple things. You have similar consistencies and issues with dogs, primarily arthritis, liver and kidney issues from having to process literal trash for 12 years, that kind of thing. So I'm not saying as a vegetarian you shouldn't own a dog. I'm saying just be aware that the things that you're feeding yourself are not the same things that you should be feeding your dog, because your dog is not your child. Your dog is an animal. And we forget that sometimes because we love our dogs so much and we think of them as family, because they are. We think of them as our kids, and because we want to give them the world. But the reality is, at the end of the day, they are a different species from us and they need to be fed as such. Now that we've addressed vegetarian diets, let's just move straight on into hydrolyzed protein diets, because they're basically the same thing. We all know how I feel about Royal Canin. So the other day I had some questions about hydrolyzed protein and what that means. So I called the Royal Canin hotline, because why would I not? I need a hobby. So I called the Royal Canin people and I was like, can you please give me a more extensive breakdown of what exactly hydrolyzed protein is, because I did Google it and your website came up and it wasn't very specific. And they were like, oh, we'll give you the walk down. We'll give you the lowdown. And it turns out the reason their website isn't very specific about what hydrolyzed protein is because It's not a very specific thing. Hydrolyzed protein, in layman's terms, is essentially when they take the chicken and they boil it and they water it down, break down that protein until it is literally unrecognizable by the GI tract as protein, and then they feed it to the dog. Wow. Wow. Okay, so what does that mean and why does it work for allergies? Work for allergies. Royal Canin's formulas are all super tailored and cater to specific needs, and the fact that they all have the exact same formula, just depending on how far up in the list they stack their corn, is irrelevant. Okay. Basically what it means is that when your dog eats the hydrolyzed protein food, say your dog's allergic to chicken, wow, he can eat hydrolyzed chicken food? That makes no sense. Why? Because the body doesn't actually recognize, it's so broken down that it's not even recognized as protein. So do we even know if that's a usable protein? Nope. Why? Because there hasn't been any actual long-term research done into the benefits or lack thereof of hydrolyzed protein. You're literally watering down food to the degree that the GI tract no longer recognizes it as food. It is essentially a vegetarian diet. Okay, of everything Royal Canin does that I dislike, hydrolyzed protein might be my new top one, other than adding salt to urinary food to encourage them to drink, even though salt can cause crystals, which is like a well-known thing. We always just come back to Royal Canin, y'all. I'm sorry. So hydrolyzed protein is very similar to a vegetarian diet because the amount of usable protein in there is so low that the GI tract can't actually recognize it, and they're not actually compensating for the lack of usable protein and meat in there with the rest of the formula. The rest of the formula is almost completely identical to their regular formula. It's full of corn and wheat germ and brewer's yeast. So that it's a big bag of carbs, and they're selling it to you for $1 zillion. That's all I have to say about hydrolyzed protein. So if your vet has said your dog has allergies and can only eat hydrolyzed protein, I would strongly encourage you to seek another opinion from literally any other vet. Everyone always asks me if I believe in holistic veterinary stuff, because that apparently is the vibes that I'm giving online, just based on how much I hate Royal Canin and Purina. And the truth is, no, I am not biased against any kind of specific medicine. I just believe that if you are going to have privatized healthcare, I think the companies involved have an obligation to be completely transparent and honest with their customers, because their customers are choosing veterinary formulas, which I'm about to get into, because their animals are sick. And the reason that I get frustrated with Royal Canin, Hills, and Purina is because they're not honest about the ingredients in their food, and they're not honest about what you're putting in your dog. And that frankly just really disturbs me. And I've had this debate so many times online. I think it's important. I think it's important stuff to share. You need to do your research when you're feeding your dog. Don't blindly take on a food just because your vet tells you it's good. You know, we used to prescribe cigarettes to people before we had the research that said, nah. We used to lobotomize people before we had the research that said, hey, you know what doesn't cure endometriosis? Brain damage. You have a moral responsibility to produce good quality food and good quality research that does more than back up your formulas so you can continue to tailor your marketing to specific needs. We're at the point now where we've been breeding dogs for so long that allergies and health issues are becoming more prevalent because those gene pools are slowly getting smaller, some quicker than others. I'm going down a rabbit hole. Okay, I'm gonna finish my last little bit here, which was veterinary diets in general. So I take an issue with veterinary diets primarily, again, because, and I've said this before, because they're marketed as science in a bag, and they're not. Every time I have a customer come into work and they're like, oh, I didn't know that I couldn't get my Purina, Royal Canin, whatever, prescription food that I get from the vet. I didn't know I couldn't get that retail. We go over the computer, we look up the ingredient list and compare the two, like the retail versus the veterinary, and 99% of the time they are completely identical. The only time I see any variation is in the ingredient list itself. So typically the veterinary diets will actually have the more filler type ingredients higher up in the list, which infuriates me to no end, because if your dog's first ingredient is corn, you shouldn't be feeding it to your dog. Ugh! And the ingredients list gets people a little bit confused, because a lot of the time, you know, there's this whole idea of like the first 5 ingredients are like what's the most in the bag, and that's not necessarily the truth. The first 5 ingredients are what is heaviest. So if you're using fresh meat weighs a lot more than corn does. So it's always going to be at the top of the list. You need to read the whole ingredients list so that you really understand what you're putting in your dog. So if you have a formula like Royal Canin where the first ingredient is yeast or corn, both of those things have a pretty high or have a pretty low weight. So if you see that and then you see your poultry byproduct meal is a couple ingredients later, that means there's very little actual quality meat in this formula, and the meat that is in there is byproduct, which means it's been cooked and processed multiple times before getting put in the kibble. And every time you cook and process meat, you lose some of that usable protein, and that's why you see such long ingredient lists, is because you then have companies who need to go back and supplement synthetically in order to meet basic nutritional needs. Dog food trends kind of mirror human food trends, and we've seen this in human food as well, when we all started using genetically modified foods and then slowly have started realizing that they're not super swell, and we're now kind of moving away from that. And you'll see things labeled non-GMO because we know that long term it is healthier and more beneficial to us and contains more nutrients and less water. So if you're doing that for humans, why would you not do that for dogs? That's why I get frustrated. There we go. That's my issue with veterinary formulas, frankly, is that I'll post some screenshots of some here, but for the most part, they're completely identical to what's being sold retail, but they're charging you extra and telling you that you're feeding your dog a prescription formula. And when people hear prescription, they think medicated, and they think that there's something in the food that is preventing them from having this allergy when they're not. So at the very least, if you're stuck on Royal Canin and you're like, no, I'm hard and fast Royal Canin, this is what I'm gonna feed, you could just be feeding the retail one because it's cheaper and it's literally the same. It's the same ingredients. And I know I'm gonna get flack for this online, and that's fine. I think this is a good discussion to have. I think it's good to have people arguing from the very pro veterinary side, like this whole idea of it's not the source of the meat that counts, but the ingredient itself. I think that it's important to hear from that side, and I think it's important to hear from my side. And like on my side, I think a lot of us believe that it is about the whole meat, and it is about not just the ingredients, but where they come from, how they're made, whether or not they're synthetic, whether or not they're GMO. Those are important questions to be asking because we ask them for ourselves. And, you know, I said earlier, dogs aren't our kids, but we treat them like our kids. So we should be taking this nutrition stuff as seriously for dogs as we do for ourselves. And human nutrition is super new. Dog nutrition is like brand new. So we should be asking those questions, and we should be having this debate. I think it's healthy. As much as it annoys me, I do think it is beneficial. It gets dog owners to double check on that little list before they put it in their dog's bowl. And I think that's ultimately what it comes down to. Oh, I almost got in trouble at work the other day because it was like New Year's Eve, and a customer, so yesterday, wow. And a customer came up to me and they were like, what's the difference between Pro Plan and Focus? And I was like, nothing, they're both trash, without even thinking. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so, like, you know what I mean? There's a difference between like giving your like opinion on something because you're trying to help them out and just being a critical jerk. And I truly felt so bad. Like, when I get frustrated about food, like about dog food, I'm not frustrated at the vets. I mean, I am, but I'm not, it's not personal, and it's not personal with dog owners either. We're all just trying to give our dogs the best we can with the resources we have available. I just think it's important to check your resources, that's all. On that note, let's depart, because I've now had to, oh my God. Because I've now had 2 glasses of wine, and I'm still coming off Lupron, so I'm actually having a hot flash right now. Should be starting this video now that I'm hammered. Oh God.